Trade rumors are really starting to pick up as multiple new reports have dropped as it pertains to Morgan Rielly and a trade. We'll break down those reports as well as discuss Brad Treliving's recent comments surrounding Morgan Rielly, revealing some details that not many fans expected and quite frankly has fans fired up. A ton to go over today, folks. Before we get into it, you guys have been absolute beasts. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. About 71% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed. Thank you guys for your continued support over here on the channel as we're on the road to 30,000 subscribers. Darius, a lot to go over today, and obviously yesterday was the big day with Brad Treliving. He spoke out a lot, but we've gotten some new reports since then, and as well, some comments from Brad Treliving surrounding Morgan Rielly and his future with the team, because fans are really intrigued, and a lot of fans want Morgan Rielly traded following, his worst season in a while, and definitely his worst season since signing that big lucrative contract. Things have gotten very interesting surrounding this situation. You can see this here with people questioning and wondering if the Leafs could go to Morgan Rielly and ask him to waive his no-move clause to try and bring more DNA change like Brad Treliving alluded to. The answer is reportedly no chance. Rielly has a full no-move clause. He loves being a Leaf, and Pierre LeBrun says that I don't think this needs to be a talking point moving forward. Darius, what are your thoughts on this? Now, we do have another report from somebody else, which we'll get to in a minute here, which kind of says not the opposite necessarily, but it's a bit more open to this idea. But following the DNA change comments yesterday, people keep referring to how they want Morgan Rielly moved, but he's a full no-move clause, and it seems, according to Pierre LeBrun here, that he wants to stick in Toronto.
Yeah, and every couple of years, I think Leafs fans, and listen, myself included, we target a few players sometimes. It happens, right? And when certain players are playing well, we give them the praise. And then when guys aren't playing well, sometimes, you get criticism. And sometimes it's warranted. And I think it was this past season for Morgan Rielly. That being said, I don't think myself, at least, I'm just speaking for myself, personally, I'm ready to move on from Morgan Rielly. I think that he does still have a good season in store for us heading into next year. There's a couple factors coming into this season. Don't like to get into, players' personal lives too much, but he had a kid. We saw how much that affected Simone Benoit when that happened, and John Tavares, those seasons when they first had their kids, right? So that could be a factor. Now, heading into next season, I think with him playing with Brandon Carlo, it didn't look great at times, honestly. It looked okay. It actually looked like, oh, wow, the Leafs have three solid defense pairings. But at times, especially in the playoffs against the Florida Panthers, it didn't really look good. They've made their bed with that Brandon Carlo trade at this point, right? He's on the team. He has term, and I think it was actually a pretty good trade. But it has to turn out well, right? So I'm willing to give them a couple months still at this point heading into next season to see how that plays out. He has a no movement clause, right? Morgan Rielly, this is. So I don't think it's going to be easy to trade him. I don't think he's going anywhere before the start of the season. I think they still believe in him. And when you look back a couple of years ago at 2023, yes, it was disappointing for the Leafs again, but when they got him a defense partner, a right shot defenseman, a stay-at-home defenseman, and Luke Shen, it really activated him. He was allowed to do whatever he wanted, play his style, and he had a stay-at-home defenseman there waiting for him. I feel like him and Carlos still need to get acclimated to each other. Again, things are weird sometimes after the trade deadline. It took Scott Laughton a long time to get comfortable in the Leafs system, so I'm willing to give them a shot still and some time to get acclimated to one another next season, but I don't know if it's time to move off Morgan Rielly yet. I do think I'm not excusing his poor play. It was awful last season, but I do think he has another level to get to, and I think that he will, because what I saw in 2023, he was their best player in the playoffs, and I still think that that's there.
Yeah, and you can see some people here. Morgan Rielly hasn't been moved this summer. He isn't a number one, doesn't provide very good D, doesn't provide much offense, slowed down a fair bit. A lot of fans feel this way about Morgan Rielly, but something else to mention, like you said, and like you mentioned, they just brought in Brandon Carlo. So if you move off of Morgan Rielly, they haven't really had a full season together. Now, it's not excusing how bad his play was, but it's interesting. I don't know from a front office point of view if they want to move on from Morgan Rielly right after bringing in Brandon Carlo. And then you have to, of course, fill in another hole. They tried Yanni Hakanpää last year, and to Brad Treliving's own admission, it did not work. It was a horrible, horrible signing. But luckily, 1-year deal instead of the 2-year deal initially reported. But speaking of reported, you can see here from Frank Saravalli, he came out with a top 20 for the NHL offseason and trade targets, and Morgan Rielly is among them in the top 5 there, and of course is one of the 5 people who are getting traded. So, of course, while some reporters are saying that it doesn't need to be a talking point, it won't happen, with the way that Brad Treliving was talking about DNA change, changing a bunch of things, everybody immediately goes to Mitch Marner, and I think that is the correct assumption. I don't think he's going to return. But Morgan Rielly would be similar towards that, and there was a question asked by a reporter, I don't remember who it was, about the defensive group and how will you be open to changing that because of how slow they are. They got hemmed in their zone a lot, especially Game 7 against Florida, but even just in general in that Florida series, yes, has been improved. And he didn't necessarily say that he wouldn't be open to making changes. Of course, he is open to making changes. Frank Saravalli's reporting, and he has in this offseason already, that the Leafs are going to be making big moves here and big trades. Morgan Rielly being among one of his trade targets makes things extremely interesting, especially with his big cap hit and the no move clause. He has 4 more years left on his deal, so you need to find a team who's willing to take him into his late 30s, which I do think there would be teams out there who, again, blue liners are extremely difficult to find here, and a left shot defenseman who in his peak had a really good offensive game and still is very good offensively relative to some other defensemen, but really lacks with his defensive ability last year. But his turnovers were the biggest killer. But it's a different report here, and I mean things are starting to escalate, and they will, especially when Brad Treliving is making DNA change comments.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that some of it, he was definitely alluding to the defense, that's for sure, and probably Morgan Rielly. And my thoughts and feelings, my personal thoughts and feelings on it, doesn't mean that the Leafs shouldn't still take a look at it and at least have the conversation this summer of what would it look like without Morgan Rielly and what can we bring in and at least kick tires on it league wide, right? At least have those conversations. That's what the GM should be doing anyway behind the scenes. And, if there is something that's good enough to then bring it to Morgan Rielly's attention, then maybe you do that. But I think it's going to be really hard. There's a lot of obstacles in the way. Getting something of equal value or better, which is what you need from Morgan Rielly, would be difficult in itself. But then having Morgan Rielly to then waive his no trade clause is going to be another obstacle. So I think there's quite a few obstacles there. And then in terms of his contract, he makes too much for a guy who doesn't play on the power play and can't offer that much offensively. But I do think that he can offer more offensively. And if Mitch Marner ends up walking in free agency, yes, I'm sure they're going to go out and try and find somebody who can maybe not fill his shoes, but another offensive player, right? I'm sure they're going to try and find somebody there. But Morgan Rielly should maybe get another shot on the power play and, come up with a different power play structure that allows him to put pucks on net, that gives him an actual role, right? Because he makes too much money for a guy who doesn't have that role right now and plays maybe 20 to 30 seconds on the power play sometimes, right? When they get that second unit out there. So I don't think he makes too much money if he were to be playing in all situations, but he's got to be better coming into next year, which I trust he will. I do believe in him that he will be better next season. Players have seasons like this sometimes. I think he'll be better next year, and he needs to be trusted more in those situations and put on the power play. We've seen that it doesn't necessarily work, but you have to build something for him to have a purpose on there because he makes that much money and he should be there and have a use. So again, that would really work if Mitch Marner walks, but it's going to be interesting to see what they do. But there has to be conversations this summer about, if Morgan Rielly's staying, like first have that conversation. What's out there? Can we make a trade? Does it even work? Once you're past that, what can we do to have him activated more?
Yeah, and obviously, Darren Dreyer's come out, at least still interested in signing Mitch Marner, so it obviously all depends on that, though. I think that ship has kind of sailed a little bit. Mitch Marner obviously has been a very important power play guy. You mentioned it. They'll probably maybe get away from the 5 forward group and changing that DNA. And maybe Morgan Rielly hops onto the first power play next year if Mitch Marner leaves in a strange turn of events here. But again, Treliving said we got to find a way to create the team, both between the ears personnel, to be our very best at the critical moments. That's something they haven't done. And hopefully Morgan Rielly can help work towards that. Or if he gets traded, we'll see what they get in return. Because you mentioned it, the contract is an albatross contract, and it seems here they're now working on putting together a team. The DNA is going to be changing every single day, and ultimately the Leafs fell short, but hopefully they can make some big changes soon. Ladies and gentlemen, let us know down below what your thoughts are on this, on everything, all these different reports. We'll keep you up to date with everything Leafs related. Thank you guys for watching. See you later.